new Hasselblad 28P, which is the latest in the Hasselblad XCD lineup. The 28P features a compact design slightly smaller than the Hasselblad 45P, comes in at a mere 245 grams, and takes a few design cues even from the new V-series lenses. This is a wide-angle lens with a 35mm equivalent focal length of about 22mm. Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at the new Hasselblad 28mm lens. This is the 28P. Some of you may remember the 45P, which Hasselblad came out with a few years ago around the time that the 907X was released. This is a great lens because it was very compact, had very high image quality, and this follows in those same footsteps. There are actually several things that I really like about this lens. First of all, the size is like ridiculously small, which is the first thing that's very cool. It's very lightweight. It's an easy lens to throw on the camera. You can take it anywhere with you. The second thing I love about this lens is, despite its size, it does not compromise in image quality. The micro contrast is outstanding. You're going to get really sharp images. This is actually very important considering the X2D has a 100 megapixel sensor, and you can see in the example images that the resolution on here is very impressive. It's also impressive to me how, considering the size and the dimensions of this lens, you would expect a lot more light fall off, a lot more vignetting. Even when shooting wide open, vignetting is very well controlled. I'm not getting a whole lot of chromatic aberration, and the lines are very straight with low distortion. So when you consider the price point, which I don't have the final number on yet, but I do know a ballpark number, it's coming in a little bit higher than the 45P, but nowhere near what the other Hasselblad lenses are. This kind of packs an incredible amount of value and makes it a no-brainer for the Hasselblad XCD system. Okay, so let's talk about size for a minute. First of all, 245 grams is extremely light. However, it adopts a full metal exterior design with a metal focus ring, so it is not cheap feeling at all. Secondly, 43.5 millimeters high. This makes this the smallest and lightest camera for the XCD system that exists. So why is this a big deal? Well, we're talking about medium format now, and typically when you think of medium format, you're going to be thinking of higher megapixel counts, but you're also dealing with larger sensors. Larger sensors mean bigger lenses. There's more area for coverage, and so this is a big deal when you have a very compact medium format system, because it's something that we really haven't seen a whole lot of up until the last few years with what Hasselblad has been doing. This is really important, and actually it's the whole point of the Hasselblad XCD system, is that you have very compact cameras that you can take anywhere. This is a big deal because a lot of times, especially if you want to go do architecture, you want to do landscapes, you can have the camera with you and you don't necessarily have to have a tripod. It's less stuff to carry. And that makes it very usable. It makes it very versatile, and you're going to actually use the camera in a much more broad set of situations than you would if you had a whole bunch of heavy gear to haul. And of course, the results with image quality are outstanding. Another very impressive aspect of this lens is actually speed. This is something that is very difficult to achieve with medium format. I mentioned earlier, larger sensors mean bigger lenses usually, so designing a more compact lens is the first step. The other thing that's very impressive is this now has a linear focusing system, so when you move the focus group, it's going to do it much more accurately and much more fast. This is very important, and this changed a lot last year when we saw the release of the X2D, because the X2D finally features a phase detection autofocus system. And so I've noticed that the redesign of the lenses that started with the V-series lenses, the X2D, and with the speed of autofocus is something that they're very serious about carrying out. The 28P is extremely fast, very accurate, and it's also quiet. And this is another thing that's very important, is that these lenses with the Hasselblad system are actually leaf shutter lenses. So this means that the shutter is in the lens. This is really cool because it allows you to get flash sync at very high shutter speeds, and that's something you can't do with a curtain-based shutter. But it also introduces an element of difficulty when you're trying to dampen the sound of the shutter, and Hasselblad have gotten increasingly better with this. So not only is this lens very fast, it's extremely quiet. Oh, and speaking of that leaf shutter, so typically the design of a leaf shutter is very versatile, but it does max out at about 1/2000th of a second. Now, the benefit to that is you do get full flash sync all the way up to 1/2000th of a second. This lens actually will go up to 1/4000th of a second. So that's a big deal, and this is a really cool direction to see Hasselblad moving in. It's going to give you more speed, and of course you can accurately flash sync all the way up if you want to do flash outside in broad daylight. It's very cool. So this is a 28mm lens, but it's a medium format camera, so you do have to consider the crop factor. This ends up being a 35mm equivalent of about 22mm. So this is an f4 wide angle, and it is very versatile. It opens up shooting possibilities in a wide range of scenarios. Image quality on here is excellent, and this is difficult to do with a compact lens design because you're looking at a target resolution of 100 megapixels. So I love the fact that it's actually very simple in its design. We have 9 elements and 8 groups. There are two aspherical elements. There's one extra low dispersion element. This is enough to achieve 100 megapixels of resolution. Field curvature and chromatic aberration are very well corrected, even when you're shooting this lens wide open, and I'm found that it's very sharp edge to edge. Another benefit to this focal length is the design allows for a much closer minimum focus distance. And so the minimum focus distance on this lens is about 0.22 meters. That's around 8 inches or so for the Americans out there. It allows you to get really close, and so this is going to allow you to get depth of field. It has a nice bokeh when you actually shoot that close to something, so it opens up a wide range of possibilities from flowers to still lifes to even food shots. I'm also very impressed with the design on this lens. It does take some cues, as I mentioned earlier, from the new V series of lenses, which I really like. Now, it's not a V series lens, so you don't have the clutch manual focus, you don't have any of the lens markings on here. You do have focus by wire, and you do have a focus ring on here, but it doesn't feel cheap, and that's important because when you consider a lens that's going to come in at a more economical price point, it's going to be a compact design, you would expect them to cut corners, because a lot of companies do, and you end up with a lens that feels very plasticky and very cheap. This lens does not. So I've been shooting with the 28P now for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I'd like to give you some of my impressions on using this lens and how I think it fits so well into the XCD system. So the X2D has been out for almost a year, and there were some major improvements to this camera, and it's been interesting to see Hasselblad evolve along the way. I go all the way back. I had the original X1D, still have it. I have bought the 907X, and then finally now I have the X2D. And this is a camera system that I'm absolutely in love with. And one of the things that I alluded to in my first impressions video that has continued to impress me in my time with this camera is this camera actually allows me to do some things that are not possible on other cameras. And that comes down to a couple points. First of all, the image quality that I'm getting from this sensor and processor combination is outstanding. There really isn't much that gets better than this. Now, the way that typically most sensor and processors work is the higher you go with ISO, the more sacrifice and the more compromise you're going to get with image quality. That got a huge boost with the X2D, and you still have a fall off. That's the nature of the beast. So I want to shoot at the lowest ISO possible. The base ISO on this camera is 64, so that's typically where I try to keep it. Now, in the past with cameras, there's a trade-off. You can't do that. You have to move up the ISO or you're going to get blurry images just from camera shake. That has changed completely with the X2D. It has the best in-body image stabilization of any system. Some of the images that I shot in here, and I've got some examples, were handheld at 1/10 of a second. This is incredible for a medium format camera that's 100 megapixels in terms of resolution. Typically, you would expect when you zoom in at 100%, you're going to see some blur, and that is not the case with this camera. My hands are not ultra steady. I think they're fairly normal. I'm not too shaky either, but it allows me to do things that I wasn't able to do before. It allows me to keep those ISOs as low as I can, and it allows for a certain type of performance that I'm able to get from this camera system that I am not with others. The second thing that I really fell in love with when I started using the 28P more here is actually the levels, the spirit levels that are in the actual system. To activate these, on the back of the camera, you're going to press the O button, and this will actually round robin through all of your display options. And you do this until you see the spirit levels come up. And there are two of them. There's one at the bottom, and this controls the rotation of the camera. And so if you want to be perfectly even with the horizon, you want that bubble in the middle until it lights up green. The spirit level on the right adjusts the tilt of the camera. So again, we're trying to go for horizon level here. You want both of these dots to end up being green in the middle of those lines there. Why is this important, you might ask? Well, it's a wide angle lens, so when you're not level with the horizon and you're shooting architecture, anything with straight lines that you want to be straight, you need to have it leveled. And this is something that if you're shooting large format or medium format film cameras in the past, you'd have to have a bubble level with, at least on your tripod, and you have to visually make sure that's lined up. All the test images that I shot in this entire video, I didn't use a tripod for anything, and that's really important, especially when you're using wider angle lenses. So again, this camera is allowing me to do things that I couldn't do before when I had to have a tripod on the system. And the spirit level is not new with Hasselblad, but when you combine all these things together, the in-body image stabilization, the spirit levels, the smaller lenses, the compact nature of this, I can put this in a very small bag. I can just take it with me and throw it and go. Another thing that's very fun about this lens and camera combination is the last firmware update that came out with the X2D finally put in the crop modes. And so there's a bunch of crop modes in there you can go between if you want to shoot square format, if you want to shoot 24 by 36, if you want to get the 35mm look, or you can go go with no crop at all. But the most interesting one in here, and I love that Hasselblad owns up to this, is the X-band crop factor. If you're not familiar with the X-band system, this was a series of cameras that Hasselblad made back in the film days that actually combined the concept of a medium format image coverage onto 35mm film. So think of it as taking a medium format strip and just cutting off the top and the bottom of the image, and you end up with this amazing crop. And it's really cool because it's this ultra wide aspect ratio. It's very cinematic and it's a lot of fun to shoot with. And I love that Hasselblad have brought that back in the XCD cameras. Of course, you're not using the full format of the sensor, but it is really cool because you're still getting a really high megapixel count in this. And it's a lot of fun to be able to set that, frame it up, and compose within this kind of cinematic scape that you've got going on here. And one of the things that I think makes it really cool is combining this with wide angle lenses. And this actually is a little bit different than what you had on the X-band cameras, but it is a lot of fun to compose in this aspect ratio. Of course, what it does is if you shoot RAW is it does maintain the full RAW file and it just crops it. So when you bring this into focus, or let's say using Lightroom or something else, you're just going to see a crop on it. You can open that up and get the full image if you need it. So it's a really cool solution, and if you've never used that on X2D, you're missing out because it is really cool to use. Another thing worth mentioning is I have a lot of experience in the Hasselblad system with actually both the 30mm lens as well as the 21mm lens. Now, it sounds like putting something in the middle of that isn't really that big of a deal, but you know, we have a 9mm difference there. But when you're on the wide end of the spectrum, 9mm is a huge difference, and I think it's a really nice hole that they filled with this lens. I have enjoyed using both of those lenses in the past. The 30, I think, is kind of an essential lens for the Hasselblad XCD system. The 21 is a great lens. It's definitely going to be more specialized because the 35mm equivalent is about 17mm, so it is an ultra wide angle. When you need it, it's incredible. However, that lens does have a lot of vignetting that I think is much better controlled on the 28mm. It's a much louder lens too, and that has to do with the evolution of the Hasselblad system. And I think these lenses that they're producing now are really awesome, and they really make this a complete system, and you can really see where that vision has been the entire way going through from the X1D forward. It's matured quite a bit, and I think this is a system that is very much unbeatable right now. It is the best image quality that you're going to find anywhere out there. If image quality, dynamic range, especially when we're talking about 16-bit color, 15 stops of dynamic range at that, if image quality is your priority in shooting, and especially if you have the immediate need to blow things up and the resolution is very important, I can't think of a better system to recommend than the X2D. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to actually be doing a one-year follow-up to the X2D, and I'd like to talk more about this camera system. So if you have any questions about anything, drop them in the comments below. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.